Hello, I'm Reverend Caroline Beckett, and I'm Vicar of Brightlingsea, but I'm also a trustee of Colchester Food Bank, and that's where I am on a volunteer shift today.
My name's Andy Griffiths. I coordinate training for the Diocese of Chelmsford, and I am lounging on my bed upstairs at home, though I was at Chelmsford Food Bank last Thursday. And together, we are at a distance rethinking Christian leadership. So Caroline, can you show us around the food bank a little bit? We did this before, I think it was episode number 3, but I imagine the food bank has changed over the past couple of months.
It certainly has. So first of all, it's got larger. So what you're about to see is just one of many sites. Some of our sites are confidential, and others of our sites are still open to the public. So we have got spaces where just parcels are being prepared by socially distanced volunteers. Then we have the sites where we meet the general public, of which this is one. And we then have Wivenhoe and Brightlingsea and Greenstead centres also open. And we are opening other centres as well. But this is our busiest centre, and it's open 10 till 2, Monday to Saturday. So I'll take you through the door. So this is the way clients would come in. The first thing you notice, if you can see, is that we have our social distancing marked out. So people wait outside and they enter one at a time. We are out of hours now, so we will not be encountering any of our clients because that wouldn't be fair to them. But there are a few lurking volunteers. So the shelves here are largely empty in this first section. And then you get to a little bit of craziness just beyond me, if you can see over my head. So this is part of where we sort the fresh things, so the perishable items that we're donated. And we sort them out and they go out in the parcels from here. So we've got all sorts of bits. Now we have things like pot noodles, which might not seem to be a particularly healthy food bank parcel item. However, we are increasingly dealing with people who only have access to a kettle or have very minimal food preparation equipment. And so they're quite useful either for people who've had to flee domestic violence and are in limited circumstances, or people who've been formerly homeless and have got very limited means. So we do parcels designed for people with no cooking facilities, as well as parcels designed for people who do. And if you just have a look behind me, you'll get a sense of the industry that's going on. But this would normally be a cafe, and it's currently just food storage. So a client would come in and stand at that black desk behind me and hand over their voucher, and then the volunteers would bring the parcel through for them. Here is the sort of nerve centre, the office, where we take all our calls and deal with all our e-referrals. Most of our referrals come through now either on the phone or via email, rather than people bringing in vouchers in person, although that does still happen a little bit. And fellow trustee Julie, and also her husband Paul, who takes our minutes of our meetings and generally keeps us in order. Behind me on the board here, you'll see this was our fundraising for our own building, which has become more imperative than ever as we run out of space to continue our operations socially distanced. We have behind me our stores of toiletries, because people don't only need food, they also need toiletries. And then behind me on the other side, you've got various bits and pieces of nappies and baby products and so forth. If we come into the warehouse, this is where all the volunteers will duck and scurry because they don't want to be on film. So this is the stuff that's of most recent date from which we make up our parcels. Here are a whole load of parcels already made up and waiting to go for the next shift. And we have a whole fleet of delivery drivers now, coordinated by Neil and Nikki, and they take food to people who cannot come to us. So a lot of these parcels will be actually delivered rather than collected from this site. Here is our sorting area, where donations that come in are weighed in at the far end on a large scale, and the weight is recorded. And then we sort them into type. So you can see some of the types along here on these little signs. And we are near the end of a shift. So these have been emptied and they've been put onto our main shelves, which are here. So we've got our main warehouse shelves. This is not our only storage site, but it is the one that is the most active. And they're then sorted into years and then into quarters within those years, and sometimes even months within those quarters. We use everything we're given. It gets weighed in and it gets weighed out, and that way we're accountable for it all. And then we have additional containers, which you can see just behind me there, storing things like the crates that we use and anything that's got a very long date.
Thank you. Thank you.
And behind me is my very busy
indeed.
husband, talking on the phone, sorting out something else.
Excellent.
And now I'm going to go somewhere where I can take my mask off and talk to you properly. Yeah, okay. There.
So here you are, Caroline. You're now in your car without a mask on. Can you give us a poem?
I can. This is actually a little one that I was going to use on our last call, and in true professional style, completely forgot it. So you get it today. And it's actually a little prayer that I wrote when my children were small. Lord, you are huge. I am a speck. Thank you for stooping down to check that all is well in my small space. Is this what the Bible means by grace?
Beautiful. You did say it was short. It was. Thank you. You know, we really want to interact with people. So you could send us questions, and you could send them to me at randomlyandy.live.com. Sorry, randomlyandy@live.com.
Or to me at revcarolinebeckett@gmail.com. And as a matter of fact, because Andy's going on holiday...
Sorry about that. I'm not going far, you'll be surprised to know.
I don't think any of us is going far, are we? So we're not recording the next episode for a couple of weeks, which gives you time to send in your questions for a listener's questions special. And also, if you like, we've been talking a little bit about storytelling, and we'll talk a little bit more about storytelling. And we've also talked a little bit about anger and energy and community organising. So if you would be willing to film yourself in a little short 30-second clip or a minute's clip, talking about either a moment where you wanted to create change and managed to, or something that made you angry and made you want to create change, then we would love to receive them and might include some of them in our broadcasts.
And next time we're going to have a special guest. And we're really pleased to say that Jonathan Cox, who's the Deputy Director of Citizens UK, will be joining us.
Now back to today's conversation. Andy, we're talking about the fourth stage of community organising, and we've called it Action Through Public Storytelling. And I guess some of our listeners might be asking, why not just call it action? Why are these people insisting on the public storytelling bit?
Yeah, and of course we aren't saying that when you've organised and listened and planned, deciding to do something without publicly telling stories is the wrong thing. You might, for example, set up a food bank. That would be an appropriate action.
And I'm not going to argue with that, especially since I'm married to the CEO of Colchester Food Bank. And yet, even the work of a food bank is incomplete if there's no telling of the stories of the people who visit it.
So people involved in coaching or counselling will have encountered the drama triangle. Imagine a triangle, if you will, with the point downwards. The 2 points at the top are labelled persecutor and rescuer, respectively. And the point at the bottom is labelled victim.
Because in any three-way relationship, and especially in families, one party will tend to act, usually unconsciously, as the persecutor, and another as real or perceived victim, and another as rescuer. Persecutor and rescuer both have power over the victim, who may be powerless or may have power under.
And the triangle does tend to rotate. Victims depend on a rescuer, but may then become persecutors in turn. Rescuers yearn for someone to rescue, but may then become victims. Persecutors need a scapegoat and may then cast themselves as rescuers, and so on and so on. In the words of Saul Alinsky, who's kind of the father of community organizing, this is what he said: when the have-nots become the haves, they are in the position of trying to defend what they now have, and their morality shifts with their change of location in the power pattern.
And if they're not careful, churches often become rescuers. And the food bank could easily be like that. The poor need food, so we, the Christians, will come to the rescue and take power over them to help them out. And in fact, that's a narrative not just true of churches, but true of all sorts of incredibly well-meaning and wonderful people in a crisis who want to help, who want to rescue, who want to save, and who want to provide. But do you see the problem? The church hasn't enabled or equipped the poor. The triangle is still in place, whereas God wants to get rid of the triangle altogether. And as we'll see in future episodes, God wants to replace it with a table. And if God casts down the mighty from their thrones and lifts up the humble and weak, then we'll presumably all end up more or less, well, at eye level with each other. And it's God who will do that. And so it's really important that we follow the iron rule and never do for others what they could do for themselves. Now, I told the story of women only swimming back in episode 11. The churches and other groups could have just contacted the swimming pool owners on their behalf. We could have started a social media campaign for them. How tempting to become the rescuer. And it can make you feel quite good as well to be a rescuer, because then you've got people who are grateful and they're saying thank you and well done and you've done this for us, and that can feel fabulous. And it can kind of feed into the bit of us that's our ego that needs to know that we're making a difference, or needs to know that we're liked, or needs to know that we matter. But that model can become really, really quickly all about us as well. That is one danger of that model. And that would have been just a take power over kind of situation. And what's needed is power with. And so we were interested in helping the Bangladeshi women and some of these other groups of women not to achieve what they want through us, but to achieve what they wanted themselves. So helping them and others rise up to a point of dignity and self-respect where they can tell their stories publicly, and so get to sit down as equals with the swimming pool owners for a conversation about how women-only swimming would be to the advantage of all concerned, because it wasn't our story to tell, it was their story.
Exactly. And I know that food banks, like the ones that you and I are both involved with, make sure that they don't just give food, important as that is, but that they also give people the dignity of being able to tell their stories.
Absolutely, and actually that's hugely important. One of the analogies that we give for our food bank is visiting our food bank is a bit like visiting A&E. So when you visit A&E, you get the initial needs met. Whatever it is that's put you in crisis, whatever you need to survive that crisis in the immediate short term, that's what we provide. But then we also look at long term, where do you go from there? Now in A&E, you might be sent home with just some simple medication. You might be given further advice. You might be told that actually, if you ring up and make an appointment with your GP, your issue can be sorted out. You might be transferred to a ward. You might be rushed straight in for emergency surgery. But whatever it is, you don't stay in A&E, nor are you expected to keep coming and having your follow-up appointments at A&E, because the purpose of A&E is to deal with you at crisis point, and then to help you get to the point where you don't need A&E. And in fact, you don't need the hospital, you don't need that additional intervention. And so if you take that model in a food bank setting, what we would do under normal circumstances is we'd welcome people in, we'd sit round a table, volunteer and food bank client, and we would hear their story. Whatever they wanted to tell us, we wouldn't push and pry if they didn't want to say anything, but we would ask them how it's been going. and how they've ended up in that situation. And then on the cafe tables would be a menu of support, not a menu of food like drinks you can order and cake and so on, although we provide all that, but a menu of organisations that would help with things like housing and debt and the capping of bills and issues around healthcare and help with benefit applications and so forth, so that we would enable people to be empowered in the choosing of who they wanted to help them through that next stage. Because as we often say, the first casualty of poverty is choice. And if you think about it, that's really quite profound, and it links in with what we say in community organising about helplessness and voicelessness, because when you don't have the economic means, there are choices you don't have. You can't choose whether to drive or take the bus. You have to walk because you can't afford to run a car and you can't afford to take the bus. You can't pick what you eat. You have to eat whatever's cheapest, and eventually you have to take what others give you. And other people will dictate to you how you should behave as the grateful poor in order to show that you are grateful for what other people have kindly provided for you. And so people who give, it can kind of set up this unhelpful dynamic where they've sort of invested in your life and they then feel entitled to the details of it, or to how you're spending the stuff that they've given you, or how you're using it, and whether they approve of how you're using it. And that creates a kind of unhealthy linkage. And actually your rescuer can end up being quite a persecutor, and your victim of all of this, or the person you're helping, can actually, you know, end up getting quite aggressive and angry at the amount of interference. But what we do instead is we offer choices. And one of the choices that we offer people is the opportunity to tell their story if they want to, anonymously or with their name. And so on every table in normal circumstances, there would be a piece of paper with people having the opportunity to write down their story in their own words. And we then post up those stories on social media. One, to take away the stigma of food banks, because if you read someone's story and you spend time with it, you realise they're actually not that different from you. And what happened to them could easily happen to you, which is scary, but a necessary realisation. But also at the same time, it enables people to feel heard. And for others to be able to comment and say, actually, this happened to me, you're not alone. Because when we tell our story, one of the things telling a story does is it shows you that you are not alone, and that the whole rest of your future doesn't have to be you depending on the kindness of others in this kind of weird symbiotic relationship. Actually, this is a phase and it's come to pass, and it will pass and you will be in a different place. And I think sometimes that is the strongest hope you can give people in a crisis, is you will not always be here, you will not always need us, and when you don't need us anymore, think about who might need you. And I guess it's about power again, really, isn't it? A lot of these things come back to power, don't they? So in an ideal world, all we'd have to do is enable people to tell their stories to those in power, and all the issues would be solved miraculously. And that really doesn't happen, does it? Or not very often.
And as you say, the reason that doesn't happen in a straightforward way is all about power.
So in community organising alliances, we don't just train people to tell stories. We arrange public events where we bring lots of people from our member organisations along, and we call that turnout. And we invite decision makers, such as, for example, police commissioners or candidates for MP or chief executives of health trusts along. And we remind them of how many people our alliance represents. And then we get the people with the real issues to tell their stories. And then in that public space, we ask the decision makers what they're going to do about it.
And I can tell you from my recent personal experience, my goodness, there's a lot that goes into making an assembly like that successful.
Oh yes, there most definitely is. And it can include a bit of drama and a bit of humour, but at the heart of an assembly are the testimonies of the people who are asking for the change. And if it goes well, the result will be a negotiation, but we'll talk about that in future episodes. And there's one final point about why we think action for Christian organisations should include public storytelling. It's about integrity. You see, although we can gladly make common cause with all sorts of other groups for the common good, we are acting because of our particular story, the story of God's action in the world, and especially God's action through Jesus.
Yeah, so if I don't tell people at appropriate times, please don't misunderstand me. I don't mean in a way that's oppressive or off-putting, but if I don't tell people at appropriate times the stories that motivate me, I might actually be misleading them. And the result of me not mentioning that my story has Jesus in it is that people might think that I'm doing things like helping run a food bank or something like that because I'm a nice person. And whether I am a nice person or not is neither here nor there. I shouldn't be getting any of the credit. The person who's taught me most about this is Roger Morris, who's the Bishop of Colchester. He is entirely fearless and unapologetic about talking about Jesus. So, for example, I remember when we were meeting with the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, we had an agreed objective of securing more funding for detached youth work with 8 to 13s. And I remember Bishop Rogers' first words at that meeting. He said, you know, Commissioner, I have a particular concern for children and young people because Jesus once said, let the children come to me.
But I've also noticed that Bishop Roger is always genuinely wanting to hear and appreciate the stories that motivate his fellow Alliance members, who are union members, Muslims, people working for a co-op, all sorts of groups. And being open about the stories that motivate us doesn't shut down other people's stories. It has, in fact, quite the opposite effect.
So thank you for listening. Don't forget, I mean, it's clear from everything that we've just said, isn't it? We would love to hear your stories and your questions and your comments for next time, not least because we've run out of questions. So please give us some more. We have been at a distance, rethinking Christian
leadership. And it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye.
And it's goodbye from my mate here.
Ah, Mike, good to see you.